Maintenant la séance. Bienvenue à la
I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 39 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure, and Communities. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, February 3rd, 2022, the committee is meeting to study the impact of commercial shipping on shoreline erosion. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person and in the room and remotely using the Zoom application.
From the Essex Region Conservation Authority, Mr. James Bryant, Director of Watershed Management Services. De la municipalité de Lanoraie, nous avons Monsieur
From Lanoraie, we have Mr. André Villeneuve, Mayor.
Of Environmental Sciences, we have Mr. Jeff Riedel, Executive Director. And finally, appearing here in person, we have Mr. Colin Rennie, Professor of the University of Ottawa. Before we begin, I would like to take this opportunity to inform members that all of today's video conference witness participants have completed the necessary audio-visual checks. And I'm just going to take a quick moment to look at each of our individual translators just to get a thumbs up to make sure everything is good to go. Perfect. We will now begin the opening remarks with, I guess we'll start off because unfortunately Mr. Jacques Grenier couldn't be here. We will begin with Mr. Bryant. Mr. Bryant, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee, and specifically MP Chris Lewis of the Essex Riding, for allowing me to speak with you on the subject of erosion in our area, both from a shipping perspective and from a natural process perspective. So as an agency responsible for the protection of life and property on behalf of local municipalities in the province of Ontario, our team is constantly faced with challenges of both flooding and erosion as our area is bound by Lake St. Clair, the Detroit River, and the western basin of Lake Erie. Now, specific to the topic of shipping and the impacts on shoreline erosion, the impacts differ as a result of the location of the shipping passageway. With the canal being situated in more of a central location within the western basin of Lake Erie, wake-driven erosion is of little consequence to the mainland because of the distance between the vessels and the shoreline itself. Impacts would be more pronounced in the Detroit River, which is much narrower, with the proximity of the canal much closer to the shoreline and the islands in the area. So, however, even in this situation, the wakes caused by large shipping vessels are generally less of a concern than the smaller pleasure crafts that operate much closer to the shoreline and that are higher in numbers. Now, notwithstanding that, the impacts that do occur from larger shipping vessels are rare, and they do have consequences, such as the impacts to personal property, specifically docks, breakwalls. These rare occurrences, the impacts are a little bit more dramatic, typically from the state of the infrastructure at the time of the occurrence. Oftentimes, it's because the state of the infrastructure, it's in a state of disrepair, and therefore the energy required to initiate full failure is much less than structures that are properly maintained. Regardless of this, the effects of any such vessel pales in comparison to the impacts caused by natural processes such as wind-driven waves, which have been causing significant impacts on the safety of local communities and public infrastructure like roads and sewers and water mains. Strong winds across large open bodies of water affect the wave climate, and it causes erosion along the islands and mainland shoreline. In some cases, the damage caused is irreparable. Chatham-Kent experienced such severe forces, erosive forces, that it caused road closures and permanent road relocations, which did affect emergency first response capabilities in the lives of those living in those nearby communities. Further west, Hillman Marsh, the Hillman Marsh Barrier Beach in Leamington is now gone due to higher lake levels and strong winds, leaving the interior diking system in this area exposed to potential wave impacts that they're not designed for. These dikes protect large inland farming operations and properties from being inundated by Lake Erie. And without it, prime agricultural land would be lost, leaving the large area a permanent piece of Lake Erie. Further west into the Essex region, I personally coordinated with engineering and public works departments to quickly install shoreline protection to protect various segments of both upper tier and lower tier municipal roadways in such areas as Leamington, Kingsville, and Amherstburg. These were all reactive measures to combat, again, the forces of nature. There's a need to evaluate these effects further to understand any mitigating approaches. We've learned that the standardized approach, such as breakwall structures, may only temporarily slow down erosion, But the continued lake bed erosion and downcutting in the areas lakeward from these structures, they're deepening, it's increasing the likelihood of failure. In essence, the very structures required to protect homeowners from the loss of their land is inadvertently exacerbating the issue, leaving homeowners at risk of substantial costs of ongoing costly maintenance and repairs. In some areas, landward migration to the lake can be as high as 4 feet per year on the average. And as we deal with many unknowns about our climate and the associated variabilities, such as record high lake levels and reduced ice cover on the western basin of Lake Erie, the winter season has become a significant factor in annual erosion rates. With reduced ice cover and prolonged elevated lake levels from 2015 to present time, some areas experienced erosion rates double those from historic studies, which can date as far back as 1976 in our area, and that were limited by the available information and technology at the time. So we're challenged with understanding and predicting these impacts. And to do so, there's a need for sufficient studies and funding to come up with a plan for mitigating measures. The federal government took a great step forward with the recent budget having allocated nearly $64 million towards flood-related studies, much of which has been funneled through the current flood hazard identification and mapping program. But as evident through these examples, our region is facing flood risk, which can be a direct result of shoreline erosion, and therefore flooding and erosion are not, in our case, mutually exclusive. So I would urge for any consideration of funds towards these issues, and coupled with the well-intentioned flood hazard identification and mapping program that's specific to flood-related undertakings. So these combined effects need to be better understood to ensure communities are safe from these threats. With that, I'd like to thank the committee for allowing me to speak, and I'd be happy to answer any questions the committee members might have to the best of my ability. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bryant, for your opening remarks. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur.
Next, we have Mr. Villeneuve. Mr. Villeneuve, the floor is yours for 5 minutes. Members of the community, hello. So, as was said, my name is Mr. Villeneuve. I have the pleasure of being the mayor of the beautiful municipality of Lanoraie since November 2021. I'm going to get right to it since I don't have much time. During our last elections, a big problem was raised, that is erosion of the shorelines, and for good reason. We're asking for help from the federal level and nothing's being done. We have the feeling that we're fighting our own federal government, meanwhile they should be helping us. When I came into this position as mayor, I decided to measure the breadth of this problem. About 500 different properties are currently affected by erosion to different degrees. You have photos of one of these properties. I can distribute the original as well if anyone would like to see, and I can answer any questions. So, as we say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so, a municipality is a local government, and so it's considered that, if necessary, we should receive help in this problem. And yes, it is necessary. We need to be here as a government listening to the people of our riding and offering them justice. Land and homes are at risk. People could be losing a lifetime of savings. And so it is very necessary that we take action. And that's why I'm here with you today, to share these people's voices. So I'm here for the citizens of Lanoraie, but also everyone who's been affected by this, people who are victims of erosion. And so I ask for your support in dealing with this problem. And we have to answer an important question. Does the federal government have a responsibility in taking care of shoreline erosion? Yes, the federal government does have a responsibility, and it is about time that it assumes this responsibility. The scientific literature is very clear on this. The erosion of fresh water in the St. Lawrence River has been accentuated by human activity. Commercial shipping has an effect on this. The number one reason for this erosion is because of water level changes. Oftentimes, this is affected by dams and dikes. And then also, like I said, because of boats going through the river. So a lot of work has been done in order to allow larger and larger ships to go through the area. There have been a lot of different things authorized by the federal government over a long period of time. Between Montreal and Quebec, the St. Lawrence River has been adapted and enlarged for commercial shipping, and things continue to get worse. There have been lots of new dams. There have been things happening in the Sorel area. And there continues to be human aspects contributing to this problem. So to me, it's clear the federal government needs to take action. This is their responsibility. Now, we need to help those who have been affected by this so that they continue to live safely alongside the river. How can we ensure that the government finally takes responsibility for this? So, for example, setting up a program that would take into account all the different steps from diagnosing the problem to doing the necessary work. And of course, funding is a part of this. These are the measures that we need because our residents can't do it on their own. The government has to act. The members of my riding are waiting upon their government to do what's necessary. And so I am here to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Maire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Le Maire.
Lawrence River Institute of Environmental Sciences, Mr. Jeff Rydell. Mr. Rydell, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as mentioned, I'm Jeff Rydell, the Executive Director of the St. Lawrence River Institute of Environmental Sciences, or River Institute, and we're based in Cornwall, Ontario. Thank you for providing me the opportunity to address the Standing Committee on the topic of the impact of commercial shipping on shoreline erosion in the river. I would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that the River Institute is located on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee. We offer our gratitude to the Mohawks of Akwesasne for their care for and teachings about our earth and our relations. The River Institute is a non-government organization incorporated in 1994 to address environmental concerns in the St. Lawrence River with a special emphasis on the upper section of the river from Kingston at the outflow of Lake Ontario to Lake St. Francis, a lake-like section of the river located between the Moses Sanders Dam at Cornwall to just below Montreal. In 2022, the River Institute and its partners embarked on a 2-year DFO-funded study to investigate the ecological impacts of waves and shoreline erosion on nearshore habitats in the upper St. Lawrence River, or the international section. You'll also hear me refer to it that way. This project arose from efforts by volunteers and representatives of the Great River Network, an environmental hub made up of more than 50 river-focused organizations that raised concerns about noticeable shoreline erosion and the possible degradation of downstream aquatic habitat in areas where large waves are generated by ships transiting the seaway. 2010 St. Lawrence Action Plan report estimated that approximately 25% of the 1,600 kilometers of shoreline from Cornwall to just below Quebec City is affected by shoreline erosion. And the section immediately upstream of Cornwall to Rockville, Ontario, has similar clay-based soils and is subject to seasonal water fluctuations of up to 2 meters and is therefore also prone to shoreline erosion. To address these concerns, the Great River Network, in consultation with the St. Lawrence Seaway Management Corporation, proposed voluntary speed reduction zones for commercial vessels to protect areas along the international section of the river, those sections with heightened vulnerability for erosion due to soil conditions and other environmental factors. And these zones are about 3 to 8 kilometer stretches of the river located near Cornwall, Morrisburg, and Brockville. Now, to reinforce and underpin the speed reduction zone measures, wave engineering data and ecological assessments are needed to characterize the causes and impacts of shoreline erosion in those sections of the river and form a basis for future shoreline stabilization work. And so the Great River Network and the River Institute partnered with researchers from the University of Ottawa, South Nation Conservation, Raisin Region Conservation Authority, to develop a research study that addresses this topic. And I should say that the Mohawks Council of Akwesasne supported the project and is assisting in its implementation. The project aims to determine the impacts of large ship waves on shoreline erosion and potential loss of aquatic habitat, focusing on sites in the western Lake St. Francis region of the St. Lawrence River, along the Mohawk territory of Akwesasne, and also in the upstream sites near Morrisburg, Ontario. These sites are impacted by shoreline erosion and are located within the voluntary speed reduction zones developed by the Seaway Management Corp. The University of Ottawa team is monitoring waves impacting the study sites from wind, ship, and pleasure boats, as well as other environmental factors to differentiate the forces contributing to bank erosion. Dr. Rennie, who's also presenting to the committee today, will provide details on the technical aspects of this work. Our River Institute team is applying its ecological expertise and extensive database on St. Lawrence River nearshore fish communities to assess whether shoreline erosion is having detrimental impacts on downstream fish communities, species abundance, diversity, and habitat quality, for example. Aerial drone technology is being used to provide high-resolution maps of habitat features such as macrophyte beds that are important for fish habitat as well as for anchoring sediments. This project constitutes a unique collaboration partnership including academia, environmental NGOs, Native communities, conservation authorities, industry, and community volunteers to generate innovative science in a format that responds to a relatable and pressing problem. It is our expectation that the project's results will be relevant and scalable to other areas of the river that are impacted by shoreline erosion and provide tangible results for the St. Lawrence Seaway Management Corporation. It will also support the development of a St. Lawrence River shoreline management plan proposed by the local conservation authorities to stabilize impacted shorelines and restore aquatic habitat using native plants and vegetation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rydell. Finally, for today, we have Professor Colin Rennie. Professor Rennie, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you said, my name is Colin Rennie. I'm a professor at the University of Ottawa in the Department of Civil Engineering with particular expertise in river engineering. Thank you for this opportunity to make a presentation to the committee. At the outset, I wish to pay respect to the Algonquin people who have a long-standing relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. And furthermore, I also wish to state my appreciation for the collaboration of the Mohawks of Akwesasne in the work I will be presenting. I will begin by presenting an overview of the influence of ship wake on shoreline erosion, and then I will briefly discuss details of the ongoing research project we have undertaken. Ship wake has been demonstrated in several previous studies to contribute to shoreline erosion. Ship waves can suspend nearshore and bank sediments. If these sediments are then transported offshore or downstream by currents or waves, then that can lead to bank recession. The likelihood of a ship wake contributing to bank erosion depends on the power of the waves, the water surface elevation with respect to the bank, and bank characteristics that dictate the bank stability, such as bank angle, sediment grain size, consolidation, pore pressure, and vegetation. The waves produced by a large ship in a narrow waterway such as a river depend on many factors, including the size and draft of the ship, the speed of the ship, the river width and depth, the channel's form, and how near the ship passes to the shoreline. In general, bigger, faster ships in narrower, shallower channels make bigger waves. In addition to a train of smaller, short-period waves, large ships in narrow rivers produce a succession of long-period waves, so very long waves, beginning with a deep drawdown, followed by a subsequent surge back up. The drawdown occurs because the ship draws water toward itself due to the buildup of water on the bow of the ship, as well as because flow accelerates on the side of the ship. The drawdown and surge can be the dominant source of erosive wave energy produced by ships. Also, though, river currents, wind waves, ice scour, water level fluctuations, and tidal flows can also cause erosion. The importance of these sources at a particular site depends on many factors such as climate, river discharge, as well as the size, morphology, slope, orientation, and proximity to the ocean of that river channel. Each of these sources is a complicated process, and the sources can occur simultaneously. Thus, it is difficult to tease apart the mechanisms. Also, shoreline recession is often relatively slow and incremental compared to, say, an individual wave action. Thus, that's an added complication to identifying the source. Nonetheless, ship-induced waves can be the dominant source of shoreline erosion at some locations in sufficiently narrow lowland rivers with low currents, limited wind waves, and high ship traffic. For example, Gaskin et al. In 2003 suggested the drawdown and surge wave heights of 0.5 to 1 meter generated by passing ships in the St. Lawrence Seaway downstream of Montreal at the Ile de Verchères can play a dominant role in claybank shoreline erosion. Similarly, a more recent study, there are locations on the Meuse River in the Netherlands where bank erosion due to ship waves at low flows has exceeded bank erosion due to river currents at high flows. As introduced by Dr. Riedel, this year we have initiated a study to understand the relative importance of ship-induced waves on shoreline erosion in the upper St. Lawrence. As a first step, data have been collected at two shoreline locations, at Mariatown near Morrisburg upstream of Cornwall, and at Jacobs Island in Akwesasne territory near Somerstown downstream of Cornwall. At the Mariatown location, satellite image analysis between 1995 to 2020 suggests shoreline recession rates of about 0.3 meters per year. Each location has 3 sampling sites with different exposures to help differentiate ship wake from wind waves. And at each sampling site, synchronous time series of nearshore water level fluctuations, as well as turbidity, are being collected. Further, the river flow field has been surveyed at each location to map water velocities and depths. Data collection will continue next year, and then numerical models will be developed to assess the relative influences of ship wake, wind waves, and river currents on shoreline erosion. The water level and turbidity data collected this year is currently being analyzed. Initial results suggest that the ship-induced primary wave heights associated with drawdown and subsequent surge have a range of about 20 to 30 centimeters, and that these events do resuspend nearshore sediments. However, at this stage of research, it is premature to draw conclusions regarding the relative influence of ship wake on shoreline erosion. So thank you. I'll take questions as you wish.
Thank you very much, Professor Rennie. And to all of our witnesses for your opening remarks. We will begin our round of questioning today with Mr. Lewis. Mr. Lewis, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes. 6 minutes, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the extra minute as well. I appreciate that. To all the witnesses, thanks very much for your testimony this afternoon/evening. It really hits home for a riding like Essex in that I like to call ourselves an island, so to speak. I know we're not, but we're awful close to one when we have Lake St. Clair, a relatively small body of water compared to the other compared to the Great Lakes. I suppose it's not a Great Lake. And then we have the Detroit River, very narrow, not very deep. And then we have Lake Erie, and a much larger lake, one of the Great Lakes, of course. And so, we talk about the shipping channels of Lake Erie, and we realize that the ships are quite a distance from shore. I know because I like to go out there and walleye fish near the fishing or the shipping channels. But we also have the Detroit River. But along that same river line, so much needed goods are brought in and taken away, right down to the point of Oreo cookies that are manufactured in the United States from our grain from southwestern Ontario. All that to say, through you, Mr. Chair, to the committee, that our shipping industry is absolutely vital. So whatever we can do to ensure the shipping industry is helped out along the way to continue to move commerce, it's going to be darn important. So this study is a very important study. I want to say thank you, Mr. Bryant. Thank you also to the CEO, Mr. Burney, for the Essex Region Conservation Authority. He's worked with the authority for as long as I can remember, and done some amazing work on so many various functions of IRCA. IRCA is short for the Conservation Authority. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Bryant. So you had spoke about flood mapping program funding. And I think you also, I believe it to be true that the last time an erosion study was done in the region of Essex, which is, of course, much larger than Essex, includes Windsor West, Windsor-Tecumseh, Chatham, so to speak, probably all the way up to Sarnia, was in 75. I think it was commissioned in commissioned 75, completed in 76. Ironically, the year that I was born, so I'm really dating myself now. Is that fair, Mr. Bryant, in that was the last time the erosion portion of the study was completed?
Through you, Mr. Chair, and to respond to the member's question, yeah, in terms of a full comprehensive study and for erosion along the shorelines, that was comprehensive to evaluate the natural effects going on out there in the Great Lakes system, and comprehensive being around Lake St. Clair, Detroit River, and through Lake Erie. Yeah, it was commissioned around 1975 with data collected then, published with annualized erosion rates in 1976. With some smaller evaluations done, coupled with one-off studies in more localized areas. But those areas are, we've had particular challenges in reevaluating those areas due to some funding and timing constraints, which I spoke to, I think, earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. And so it was interesting to see those pictures earlier on that were sent around and about the erosion. And I think about the other side of Point Pelee, which is certainly not in my riding, but it's not very far, and literally moving roads because the roads are being washed into Lake Erie due to erosion. So my question, Mr. Chair, back through you to Mr. Bryant. So under this funding program, I think you said 76 million, I think it was. Is there a portion of that? Is that with regard specifically to erosion mapping, or is erosion out of that funding?
Through Mr. Chair. Currently, there's no eligible expenses to the flood hazard identification and mapping program that's being administered through NRCan and funneled through the local provinces. There's no portion of that that's eligible towards erosion hazards.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bryant. And so is there anything, so I realize the IJC, International Joint Commission, they basically just study the water levels. Is there any funding? Is there any conversation between the countries with regard to opportunities to get funding to do something that's, because quite frankly, this is not just Canada's problem, it's United States problems as well. Is there any, are you aware of any funding of that? Or how helpful would that be for the planning for IRCA, for the Essex Region Conservation Authority, going forward?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I don't have any awareness of available funding out there specifically to address that. So I guess in part to my earlier remarks, we're hoping to see something become available because we have a combined effect here that we're dealing with in terms of the flood hazards. And as I mentioned before, the program that was initiated, it's very important. It was a great step forward. But there's a dual impact in some of the large flooding impacts because of the flat topography, the nature of the flood control structures that could be exposed to some of that wave action and energy. There's an erosive force that can drive and initiate that catastrophic flooding consequence. So we'd be hoping to or open to seeing any other sources of funding that would be out there that we could hopefully couple with some of the other flood-related programs out there.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, how much time do I have left, please?
Actually, your timing is perfect, Mr. Lewis. You had no time left. Thank you very much. Next, we will go to Mr. Badaway. Mr. Badaway, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'll start off with some questions and some comments later on. Hopefully, I get some time for my colleagues to allow me to pass on some further comments. But first off, I want to thank you folks for being here today, because this is an important issue. This is something that's near and dear to my heart with the Great Lakes, the St. Lawrence, and of course everything that's attached to it, not only the benefits of it, but also the challenges that we experience in this shoreline erosion and many others being some of which we experience, some of us on a daily basis, quite frankly. But when we look at the St. Lawrence River, and I want to start off with that, and I'm going to start off with Jeff Riedel with respect to his comments. Comments taken, and of course regarding the 17-19 flooding of Lake Ontario, do you have any idea what the cost was, either financial or environmental, of those extreme weather events to the shorelines of the St. Lawrence at those given times?
I think that the IGC has done some work to look at that. I don't have that number in front of me. I know there's very extensive study done by the Great Lakes Adaptive Management Committee and the IJC looking at those flooding events in shoreline, as well as surveys that were done on both sides of Lake Ontario and St. Lawrence River to find out from shoreline owners in terms of the level of which they experienced erosional problems. But those high water events obviously did result in significant erosion in certain areas particularly, but I don't have those numbers in front of me exactly in terms of the costing.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Riddell. If you can possibly forward those to me, if you can get your hands on them, that would be great, because it could give us a good idea with respect to what our returns on our investments will be, if in fact we make that comparison. With respect to the work that Quebec's doing right now, and I've heard that the government of Quebec is using some of the federal disaster relief funding from 2017 or 2019 flood to turn once hard shorelines into soft shorelines that can better adapt to changing water levels and reduce erosion. Have you seen any examples of shorelines being successfully rebuilt after flooding or erosion? First question. And second question is, would soft shorelines designed to reduce flood damage address the issues caused by, for example, boat erosion and other methods of erosion, and how?
So I understand, Mr. Chair, that this question was addressed to me, and I can give it a start, and there might be others who can speak to it as well. So we do, my most, again, through you, Mr. Chair, to the member, my experience is mostly in this section below Montreal. So that's where I would have seen some examples of some shoreline work that's been done through conservation authorities and some other programs, particularly emphasis on those soft techniques. In discussions, particularly with our partners at the Mox of Akwesasne, which have had some issues with and has had some engineering done on shoreline restoration using those soft techniques. They, and this is more or less recounting back on the what was passed on to me. There was a moderate success rate, and the issue with the shoreline work that they've seen is that the sort of an overgrowth and the soft structures haven't in several cases lasted the length of time that they had anticipated. So while it did mitigate and slow down the erosion, the long-term effect was still continuance of erosion. And in particular, this work was done
Monsieur
on
le Président,
Yellow Island.
appel au règlement.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I think that the interpreter is having a hard time interpreting because there's too many mics open right now. Could we double check that? Yes, thank you very much. We're going to check.
So it looks like the issue has been resolved, but perhaps Mr. Rydell, if you could just start speaking again to make sure that there's no issues, and then I'll look at the translators to make sure, get the thumbs up from them that we're good to go. So I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Rydell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I might ask that the member to repeat the second part of his question for me, please.
I just want to look over at our interpreters to make sure that they're good. Wonderful. Okay, so what I'm going to do, Mr. Badaway, I'm not going to let that interrupt your time. So we're going to give you 2 minutes left, 2 minutes 15 seconds left, and I'll ask you to repose the question to Mr. Rydell, and we'll allow Mr. Rydell to respond.
Thank you. Essentially, we were speaking about the rebuilding, and what I'm trying to do is get to the how, to the what. We understand what the what is, so how can we resolve this? And I was talking about the shorelines and some of the work that they're doing in the Quebec region with respect to soft shorelines versus hard shorelines. Right. And Mr. Riddell was explaining some of his experiences with that work.
Right, thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So my expertise is not in shoreline erosion and shoreline restoration. That's usually the purview of conservation authorities. I have, through anecdotal evidence, seen some positive examples of soft shoreline techniques, but I've also heard that they, in some cases, have not lasted the length of time that was expected. But I might defer to perhaps our colleague at the Conservation Authority, who's present with us, who might have some very hands-on experience with that.
Thank you, Mr. Riddell. And I am going to go to Mr. Bryant now of the Essex Region Conservation Authority, and he can finish off that answer. But also, I wanted to touch on the neighboring community of Chatham-Kent. Was in the news for having buildings once 50 meters from the shoreline ending up in Lake Erie after storms eroded more land in a few weeks than have been eroded in the past 100 years. And having septic tanks, for example, popping out of the ground as the water table rose after severe weather events. So I guess extending from the question I just asked Mr. Riddell, a few other questions. And I'm trying to, again, get that contrast of cost between, in terms of the returns on investment the government can, and all of us can recognize with respect to those investments. What is the cost to your municipal government from erosion caused by severe water events, erosion caused by higher water levels, and erosion caused by shipping and or boating? Mr. Bryant?
Thank you, through your chair. I'll say that question is a challenging one to unpack wholly, because we start to consider the full financial impacts of something like that occurring. We're looking at the immediate financial impact to the municipal landowner themselves, which is a very costly undertaking to undertake repairs on something like that. Costly road repairs. You're looking at overtime for cleanup crews, during a flood event, repairing those roadways, finance departments maintaining all the records and that sort of stuff. So I don't have any experience personally on providing an actual cost of that, but if we look at some of the other flooding events out there, they have been pretty substantial. I think there's documented evidence on that at how costly they are, whether it's in Ontario or across the country. If I may speak to the soft shoreline, techniques and in our area, generally, through our personal experience in our area, they're not heavily promoted because they just can't withstand the wave energy that's out there from the natural forces. So when we take that into consideration, we have to ensure that a new development that would be going in would be protected for a minimum number of years. And some of the soft shore techniques that are out there may not meet that minimum standard.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bryan. Unfortunately, time is up for that round.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant.
Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Barcelou.
Next, we have Mr. Barcelou Duval. The floor is yours for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm going to start with Mr. Villeneuve, the mayor of Lanoraie. So I know Yves Parent from your riding, who has tabled a question on the shorelines in terms of ship speed limits, but also about the question of the program that once exists from the federal government aiming to protect shorelines from erosion. So this was similar to what I had done years ago, more so in my region. I would like to know what answer you got. What I understood was that you were told that there were already voluntary speed limits, and I'd like to know if you think that's enough and if you'd like to add anything to that. So my name is Mr. Villeneuve, but that's okay, I understand. So I think, given the facts, you've seen the photos, what has been done up until now has not been enough to get rid of this problem. We can read the science. It says that lower the water level is, less there is erosion. Higher it is, more there is erosion. So it's quite logical. And we can see that there have been 4 sort of structures that have been installed by the federal government. And this is actually causing an increase in water levels in the river. Experts don't agree, however, on the water height that does contribute to this. So to respond to your question, I'm not an expert, but what's sure is that there's an urgent need to act. I think that these voluntary measures that we have not done enough and don't allow us to say that everything's okay. Thank you for your answer. So this leads to my next question, because you're here as the mayor of Lanoraie. We have also spoken to the mayor of Contrecoeur this week. So different municipalities have been affected by this. Do you work with neighboring municipalities, or are you aware of other municipalities who are up against similar problems? So like, you know, you said hundreds of citizens who are along the river in your area. What can you say about this? No, I would say this is widespread. So we do work with other municipalities such as Berthier, amongst others. So other places do have members of the riding that are trying to speak to people, to ask the federal government to do something. You know, I was an MNA for years, and I know that when the political will is there, we can do a lot. And this is the message that I'm here to share. It's that, yes, you have the means to change things, and we need to act quickly because the situation is only getting worse. Thank you. So you spoke of cities in the north because I guess you were on the northern side, but then there's also the southern side near Contrecoeur, where I'm from. We can also think of Sorel, amongst other places. So this leads me to ask you a question on another topic. I heard some colleagues ask, you know, what responsibility do we, the federal government, have to set up financial programs, you know, for these protective structures? What responsibilities does the government have to fund restoration projects for private land? They have full responsibility. Because since we opened up the St. Lawrence River, you know, it's back into the 1800s. It was opened up for commercial shipping. There's been dredging, for example, and there are dams. There have been retention booms installed. And so there have been all these human interventions that have made it so that the shores are much wider and larger than they were before. And so if we ourselves as municipalities had made money off of the river having had work done on it, you know, things would be different. But in the end, we are the ones who are victim. We have been harmed by this. Thank you. How much time do I have left? 45 seconds. So one more question. Do you think that members of your riding that have tried to speak up, you know, do you think that they have an idea of how many properties have been affected? Like I said, it's at least 100 properties. We don't have necessarily a formal number on that, but we are working to get a good inventory of exactly how many pieces of property have been affected by shoreline erosion. And yes, people are really working hard to make a difference. Thank you very much.
Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all of our witnesses. I'm just looking for which microphone I'm going to use, probably this one. I'll continue with some questions to Mr. Villeneuve before moving on to Mr. Riedel. Mr. Villeneuve, I was very interested in what you said about going around and assessing how many properties have been affected so far by the erosion. My question is about your municipality's relationship with the federal government on this topic. Have you reached out to the transport minister and advocated for the department to take action on shoreline erosion? And if so, could you describe those efforts to advocate with other orders of government?
Non, nous n'avons pas encore été.
No, we have not yet contacted the government. This is a new movement. Well, it's new and it's not, because before I was elected in 2018, 2019, people were mobilized through a petition. And then with the pandemic, the movement stopped. But I will, keep this in mind. I think it's a great suggestion. But I think this would apply to all municipalities that are in a difficult situation right now.
About how vital the St. Lawrence is to Canada's economy and to the supply chain. I wonder if the federal government consults municipalities when there are significant increases in shipping traffic related to economic growth or the opening of different shipping routes. Is that something that at the municipal level you've been consulted on or had any interactions with the federal government on?
Pas du tout, pas à ma connaissance.
Not at all, not that I'm aware of, at least. There hasn't been any type of consultation. I was also mayor for 9 years, and I was never consulted or asked to be consulted by the federal government in terms of shipping transport on the St. Lawrence. I think it would be a great idea, though. Yes, I think we need to work together if we want to make change.
I turn to Mr. Riddell for a couple of questions. Mr. Riddell, I was interested in what you said about your research study being supported by the Mohawk, and it would be nice to have them here as a witness to share their perspective on this issue. I wonder, in your conversations with them, if they've conveyed concern about this issue, and if you could share with the committee any information on the Indigenous context.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. That is a really interesting aspect of this question in the context geographically where we live, and in that Lake St. Francis between the Moses Saunders Dam and Montreal, Beauharnois. In there, the islands that, as we move through, are all of the part of the territory of the Mohawks of Akwesasne. So they're quite exposed to the shipping traffic as it moves its way through that section of the river. And there are a number of different islands that are particularly vulnerable. One of which I mentioned already, Yellow Island. There's a sand, sort of a layer of sand that forms part of the basis of that island, and as you can imagine, it is very prone to erosion. So the concerns are quite high with respect to erosion and the properties in the islands along that portion. In terms of the support that's provided, there's actually one of the members of our study group is a Mohawk and has provided access through to one of our sites, which is an island, and Dr. Rennie can speak to it directly in terms of the work that's being done there, and so we're quite interested in that impact. They're also quite interested in this impact with respect to the potential impact for where you have active erosion, the downstream transport of sediments that may then be fouling, for lack of a better word, the habitat downstream because of the native fish populations that might be then impacted in terms of spawning grounds or habitat. So these are all concerns that we've had with our partners at Akwesasne.
Okay. Maybe I'll turn to Mr. Rennie to ask a few questions about the research, and I have quite a few of them here, but I'm keen to know whether there's any indication that biological factors are exacerbating the problem of shoreline erosion. Is that something that's within the scope of your research, or do you have any comments on that?
When you say biological factors, you mean shoreline vegetation?
Yeah, that's one that comes to mind, or animals, wildlife that use the shoreline. Is this a factor?
So In general, in my opinion, shoreline vegetation does actually inhibit erosion. So it's generally good to have shoreline vegetation. Particularly rooted vegetation can help hold the soil together. There have been quite a few studies elsewhere of animals burrowing into banks, birds, muskrats, whatever. Crayfish was one study showing that can actually change the erodibility of the soil. I'm not studying that here, but it is a factor in some places. But certainly, shoreline vegetation is very important.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bachrach. Next, we have Mr. Strahl. Mr. Strahl, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. It's good to hear from you all. I bring greetings to Mr. Dahl and Mr. Rennie from Eric Duncan, who wished he could have been here today. But he did ask if I could ask a couple of questions. And I don't know which of you, I know clearly you've worked together on some of this research, which has been, I believe, was some federal funding. I believe I heard Fisheries and Oceans had contributed some money. So when those grants for research funding were given, was there also an indication at that time that the government would be following up on those recommendations, or is it simply information that they will receive and do with what they will, or did you get a commitment that there would be a government response and an action plan that came out of the research that you presented to them?
Yeah, perhaps Jeff should take that one. Yeah, please.
Yes, I was going to get started anyway. So in response through you, Mr. Chair, to the question, so there's no action plan or guarantee that the results of our study will be implemented. However, I would say that we were actually in kind of surprised initially by this, but we were actually contacted by the unit at DFO that is responsible for assessing shoreline habitat, and just at that time, just to express their interest, great interest in our study with respect to some of their decision-making processes in which to assess those impacts and recognized that in their view, at least the way that I recall the conversation, that there was a lack of information on those effects of where there's erosion happening, what happens downstream. So no promise of a program to institute the recommendations, but definitely I think there is considered interest by Department of Fisheries and Oceans in the results.
Thank you. Mr. Bryant, I was interested to hear your testimony where you indicated that there were numerous factors that impact erosion in the areas that you are looking out for. Can you talk about, I haven't heard anyone talk about wanting to eliminate shipping in these areas. I haven't heard, and obviously we're the Transport Committee, so we're looking primarily at the impacts of commercial shipping on erosion. So in your opinion, what more can be done if speed regulations or speed restrictions are already in place? Are we talking about further speed reductions, or are we talking about eliminating shipping from some of these areas where a speed reduction doesn't have a significant impact? I guess I'm trying to, from a transport perspective, understand what your recommendation would be regarding shipping to have an impact to reduce erosion. Does it need to be further speed reductions, or do we need to see investments in shoreline protection that will protect shoreline erosion from numerous factors, including water levels, wind-driven waves, all of that? Is it the speed of the vessels, or do we need to look at this more comprehensively in terms of protecting the shoreline from all factors that contribute to erosion?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the member's question, my expertise do not lie in shipping. However, as I mentioned, we have different circumstances within our area depending on where that shipping and that vessel is, whether it's through Lake Erie or through a narrower portion of the Detroit River. And with that, I think it's important and extremely beneficial that we look at all of the factors associated with this. And as a result of that comment, I think it's prudent that we conduct a proper study to understand the full impacts of these types of situations, in our specific area, at least at a minimum.
Maybe I would, with my limited time left, ask Mr. Rennie or Mr. Riddell, if you, to that same question, has your research shown that shipping is obviously we addressed this in your testimony, but I'm trying to get as we look to recommendations here, are we looking to protecting the shoreline, or are we looking more to eliminating, changing water heights, or however you want to put wakes? How do we need to just address wakes, or do we need to focus our primary attention on general shoreline protection?
Perhaps I'll start, and through the chair, thank you. As I said, it's a bit premature because we're only in year one of this particular study, but I think it has to be a bit of a combination of both. As I said, the size of the wave depends on the speed and size of the ship, as also the distance from shore, along with all the other factors. So if it can be possible to regulate or encourage ships to move at certain speeds that reduce and distances that reduce the wave height, then that makes sense to me. But I think also shorelines along rivers in general need some kind of stabilization if they're already eroding to and ideally it would be in a way that does allow some naturalization so that natural river processes of sediment transport can continue.
Thank you very much, Professor Rennie.
I know it's hard for academics
to
do it 30 seconds.
Next, we have Mr. Iachino. Mr. Iachino, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes. Unfortunately, Mr. Iachino, you are on mute. I will let you restart.
Oui, bonsoir.
On vous attend.
We can hear you now. Okay. Okay, I'll start again. I lost the screen. Okay, here we go. Good evening to everyone. Thank you for being here today. My first question is for Professor Rennie. Do you know any initiatives in Canada or outside of the country that have managed to mitigate the erosion of the shorelines? And if yes, could you tell us more about this?
Thank you for the question, and through the chair again. I'm more familiar with the studies that have tried to assess whether ships are inducing erosion. I have to admit I'm a little less familiar with all the regulatory aspects. So I think I will have to defer on that one. But I will say it's a topic of great interest in Germany, in the Netherlands, in the United States. There are studies on the Savannah River in Georgia. There's a research institute, and the National Research Institute in Germany has set up its own lab to study this issue. So certainly it's a topic of concern all over the world.
Merci, professeur.
Thank you, Professor. Mr. Villeneuve, other than shoreline erosion, how has climate change been affecting water levels in Canadian waterways? And also, how could this affect navigation in coming years?
Répondre à votre question, malheureusement, je ne suis pas un expert en la matière. Mais chose certaine, si on regarde les prédictions.
So I'm not an expert with this, but if we take a look at rising water levels in waterways and the ocean, I don't think things look very good, but I'll let the experts answer the question. So I know you're not an expert, but you might have some knowledge in the field. Is that a question or a comment? It's a comment. Let's say a compliment. Thank you, Mr. Lemaire. Next question will be for Professor Rennie. What recommendations would you like the committee to send to the Government of Canada in terms of this general topic?
That's a very broad question. I think I've already answered that. It makes some sense to me that there be some, at least, assessment of what speeds ships can go at to have reasonable size wakes in particular locations. It's very site specific. And so I think it needs to be understood what speed limits need to be at different locations. I think I'm not sure I'm the right person to give the answer as to who should be paying for all of this. That's probably for the committee members to answer.
Merci.
Thank you. Mr. Riddle.
Increased shipping, cruise ships and ferry service moving more people and goods around the province and the world. Are there any recommendations that the Quebec government's marine strategy to address the impacts of increased boat wakes to the shoreline?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I understand the question in terms of just the general recommendations with this increased traffic. I mean, I think it's along my response would be along the lines of what has been discussed in terms of understanding that this is a complex problem that requires multiple angles to address, and that perhaps, yes, partnerships with, as suggested, with municipalities and other levels, tiers of government need to work together to identify possible solutions, including shoreline stabilization. So my thought is that the government, federal government, can show leadership in this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Riddle. Again, as we move to reduce the amount of carbon in our transportation network, shipping goods, etc., what recommendations could you make to protect our shoreline from damage while using low carbon transport, such as shipping?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I think that's the way I interpret it. It's still the question of how to best manage the existing seaway with the commercial ships that are at hand, and multiple aspects in terms of approaches. I think is the solution, including engaging the shipping industry with respect to the design and the operation of those ships to reduce the waves, as well as the communication strategy.
Yeah. Thank you. Monsieur Villeneuve, une dernière question.
Mr. Villeneuve, one last question. Unfortunately, we have no more time. Next, we have Mr. Barcelou-Duval. The floor is yours for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My next questions will be for either Mr. Rennie or Mr. Riddell, whoever feels they are in the best spot to respond. So it's also a comment. Some people, including yourselves, I think, have underlined the fact that sometimes it's difficult to quantify the effects of commercial shipping, because there's also other aspects, natural aspects, like the depth of water, the distance from the shore, all these different things. And so it's sometimes difficult to really get good numbers on this. But what I'd like to know is, what is the scientific data right now on the situation? And on the other hand, have there been comparative studies on areas where the shoreline has not been modified and there are ships passing through, versus other areas where ships aren't passing through? So are we able to compare these different situations? Have there already been studies done to compare areas with and without commercial shipping? Then are we able to see the effects of this over time?
Perhaps I can start. Dr. Riddell, you can follow. So I can reference one study, Savannah River in Georgia. There's an island, and the ship channel is on one side of the island. They set up a study to see what the wave height was on the other side of the island, as well as on the exposed side. And interestingly, due to this drawdown and surge phenomenon, it was actually observed on the other side of the island as well. Not to the same magnitude, but the point being, in a given situation, such as downstream of Montreal, there's one side exposed. There could be effects even on the other side of the island. from the shipping. Now, again, I am not ready to say that in my study, shipping is the cause of erosion. It's premature for me to say that in this particular study, but I think it has been observed in other places.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to know if studies have been done to quantify or at least evaluate the impact of the wake of a commercial ship, typical commercial ships versus pleasure craft. The reason I ask this question is that I know that for pleasure craft, we've done studies on wakeboards that shows that it can take 300 meters, can be 300 meters wide before we lose this wake. And so what's the comparison between these two things?
Yes, so you're absolutely right that some pleasure craft and wakeboard boats actually create quite large waves, and it's because they displace quite a lot of water, and it's kind of on purpose to make a wave for surfing. The difference actually is this drawdown and surge long period wave that container large ships create. Pleasure craft don't have the same displacement to actually draw water to themselves in the same way. So yes, pleasure craft can cause erosive waves, absolutely, but they don't have that drawdown and surge wave.
Thank you very much, Professor Rennie. Next, we have Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Rennie, has your work included any assessment on the efficacy of the voluntary speed limit reductions?
No, not directly. We'd have to get to the numerical modeling part to be able to do that, because
Okay.
we're only studying what's happening right now.
Through your research, have you come into contact with any agencies or parties that are monitoring compliance with the voluntary speed limit reductions? Like we've heard from other witnesses that they feel like at
Yes.
night the ships aren't obeying the voluntary reductions.
I know that Dr. Riedel has actually been communicating about this. I'll ask him to answer this question.
Fabulous.
Yes, and thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. In fact, that was a question in preparation for this meeting that I posed to our partners at the St. Lawrence, at the Seaway Management Corporation. And in fact, they know always what they know at all times, what the speeds are of ships transiting the seaway. And in fact, they do measure compliance with respect to these speed reduction zones. I believe the compliance is considered to be pretty high. Although one thing I found is interesting is that this is measuring compliance is not simply like we would measure compliance in a car going from 100 kilometers an hour down to 80 kilometers an hour. There are many different factors involved, fairly sophisticated as well, including a knowledge of the type of the ship, the vessel, the design, the characteristics of the ship, the load, and the environmental factors at play. Because the other side of the coin is that the ship has a minimum speed at which it must transport in order to be safe. And my understanding is that is communication that is best decided by the captain of the vessel, and but there is active communication, is the way I understand it, between Seaway and the captain with respect to these speed reduction zones. So it does sound to me that there is a commitment in order to ensure that these speed reduction zones are being met, and I would like to know more information, in fact, because it does sound to be quite complex.
Thank you very much, Mr. Riedel, and thank you very much, Mr. Bachrach. Next, we have Dr. Lewis. Dr. Lewis, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to thank all the witnesses. This is a very, very important topic. I myself live on a shoreline, and this past summer we had to fortify our banks, and so I know how important this issue is to homeowners, especially. And my first question is for Mr. Villeneuve. I'd like to know the composition of private versus business versus government ownership along the shorelines.
Essentiellement, ce sont...
It's mainly residents. So on the coast, 368 properties are residents. So I'd say 98% of them. And you know, it's often quite a battle to get all the different permits and authorizations that we need to, you know, fortify our banks. I know that you said you did this.
That's the difference. In the pictures that you showed me, many of the homes were on a cliff, and I know that that has a completely different expense level and requirement. And could you give us an average of what the average cost? I know it would depend on the size, the width, and also the depth of the cliff. What would, for the average cost that you're hearing from the residents, what would that be?
Écoutez, chaque cas est différent.
Each case is different. You're right. We have to add the fact that, you know, if it's a cliff, usually there's a certain amount of sand there. Could be, you know, different heights, 8 to 10 meters. But the shoreline is not always made up of the same type of soil. Further we go to the east, there's usually more sand, and more to the west, this again will vary, and the levels of sand. And again, people have looked into getting work in many cases, but it's so expensive. And like I said, there's a lot of different permits to get.
Putting rocks there to fortify it, you would probably have to put some sort of cement type of bank in order to protect the erosion. Is that what you're looking at from those high cliff properties?
Ben, écoutez, ce qui est fait normalement,
Usually what's done, again, I'm not an expert, I'm just telling you what people have done when they were able to do it with the program that was once in place before 97. So usually they're going to start working at the bottom of the cliff and add a lot of rocks and keep adding them at a certain angle. And before it was with concrete, as you can see in the photo that I passed around before. This is from the 50s. Or sorry, it's about 5 years old. But again, you really need to be an expert, and each case might need its own solution, because the circumstances vary. So you need expertise, real expertise, in order to do it in a way that will be durable.
Fisheries said that it's not the responsibility of the government, but I noticed that there was a St. Lawrence Seaway program from 1959 till 1997. Do you have any information about why this program stopped and why it all of a sudden is no longer the government's responsibility?
Ben, je pense que le fait d'avoir eu un programme à l'époque.
Well, I think the fact that there was a program at one time says a lot. You know, right now, a lot of the erosion is because of water levels rising, and this has a direct impact on erosion. How much of an effect this has, I don't know. Why did they stop the program? I think that they wanted to decrease spending. I think it was Jean Chrétien at the time. And I think it's unfortunate because now having to do something, it's going to be even more expensive because of all the damage. Thank you very much, Mr. Villeneuve and Dr. Lewis.
The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start off by saying this. All the testimony that you folks give, go to those analysts over there, and that is the basis of the report that we're going to be entertaining and the response that the minister is going to be considering. So it's very important that you don't hold back on anything that you have. And any additional information that you folks might have to send in to us, by all means, I encourage that, because once again, that gets added into the testimony and, of course, the response we're expecting from the minister. With that, I want to really concentrate on Mr. Villeneuve, because I was once a mayor on a lake and experienced some of the same challenges that you're experiencing. And hence the reason why, as a mayor, I got involved in the Great Lakes Cities Initiative. I'm not sure if you're involved in that initiative, but I know some of your neighbors are, especially to the north in Trois-Rivières. And I can sympathize with what you're going through because you're in a narrow part of the river. And being in a narrow part of the river, Mr. Mayor, that can pose some challenges, especially with respect to the wakes that are coming off the ships that are traveling and transiting that area. But I guess as a first comment, you really may want to get involved with the Great Lakes Cities Initiative that are actually tackling some of these issues with us, the federal government. What are some of those strategies that we're putting in place with not just the federal government, by the way, but the provincial level of government, the municipalities, as well as on the American side with their federal level of government, their states, and of course their municipalities. But when we look at, for example, a report that I brought forward to our team here on this side of the table with respect to the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, that's something that the U.S. is currently doing and we want to embark on. So it's an initiative that I'm trying to get off the ground with our cabinet. As part of that, it also dovetails or aligns with the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Action Plan 2020-2030 that identifies a lot of recommendations about shoreline erosion and I'll say other, having to do with the Great Lakes. With that as well, we have also embarked on many other initiatives through the doubling of the gas tax, and of course, it's now called the Canada Community Building Fund, the Investing in Canada Plan, Green Infrastructure Fund, and others that the Federation of Canadian Municipalities somewhat is the steward of, and that can be applied for by municipalities to take on some of these strategies that we're working on. So, frankly, the myth that the federal government isn't doing nothing is wrong. We are moving the ball down the field, albeit I guess it would be subjective on how fast that ball is getting down the field. But we are trying, working with our partners, as I just mentioned. So I guess my question is this, and I'm going to open it right up to all of you, including Mr. Mayor yourself, because you're the one that has the rubber on the pavement. You're the one that's feeling the hit on this from your residents, and I respect that. How can we ensure that municipal governments can direct more funding towards shorelines and erosion projects? I know that's a loaded question because you're dealing with so much in this time of the year when you're entering into your budget process, both from the operating and the capital sides. I get that. But I want to open up that question because what can we do with you in terms of the strategy and financing to help you supplement what you may be already doing? And the second question is, what support and resources may be available, for example, from the provinces, the Quebec, and of course other levels of government, such as your own level, that may be available to you, that we can also work with to try and help you. Mr. Mayor?
You're right in saying that, in the absolute sense, the federal government isn't doing nothing. The question is, can they do more? And I think that we can all agree on the answer. That is, yes, they need to do more. But it's not simple. We have all these municipalities along the riverside. This goes from Sorel to Montreal and maybe even further. And we urgently need to act right now. Now, where do we start? I think that we can start by assessing each property. You know, when we want to expand a road, we're going to do a technical assessment of everything, of all the properties. And so we're going to have an idea of where each property is and what it's up against. And then we'll be able to know what work needs to be done to stabilize the area. So again, I'm not an expert, but there's an entire process to follow. And we need to begin quickly. If the federal government had a program before 1997, you know, what I'd like to say to you as members here at the federal level is, you know, we need to establish what are the things we can do right away. What I really want to say is we need to act quickly.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I am going to pass on some information to you after the meeting to get you involved in this process so we can do exactly what you actually expect us to do. is get involved in some of the strategies that we're moving forward with. Okay. Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Badaway. Next, we have Mr. McGuire. Mr. McGuire, it's good to see you joining us today. The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry. It is a pleasure to hear the witnesses tonight in regards to this afternoon. I have some questions for Mr. Bryant, but also, Mr. Rennie, you indicated, I come from an area of Manitoba that's basically the confluence of the Assiniboine and the Red River in Winnipeg at the Forks. There hasn't been any navigable freight on the Assiniboine River since the steamships in the early 1900s, but there has been erosion of the riverbanks, and mainly it comes from flooding, higher and lower levels. There's no real wakes or waves in that regard. And so I'm wondering, obviously the narrowness of a river makes the difference. The wider area up by Gas Bay and this sort of thing in the St. Lawrence particularly probably isn't as big of a problem in regards to the types of erosion that we're looking at. I think it was, if we could just get you to comment on that. You mentioned that you weren't sure from the studies that have been done that this was causing the erosion. Okay. Yes, thanks.
Our particular study, we just haven't collected or analyzed all the data yet. Okay. So only after we've been able to finish the study will I hopefully be able to distinguish the erosion due to regular river currents versus ship wake versus wind waves. So I agree. Rivers erode naturally. I mean, that's how I define a river as something that moves water and sediment. So it is part of the natural function of a river to move sediment. The question is whether, in this case, whether ship wake is increasing the rate of that erosion.
It doesn't matter whether it's the St. Lawrence or the Assiniboine or the Red, from my understanding, that volume of water moving through a narrower channel in the river is more susceptible to causing that erosion.
That's right, and that's why we tend to get more erosion during floods in spring. Right?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. Mr. Bryan, I'd like to, because your involvement with a conservation authority, I've had some work with that as my days in conservation critic back in Manitoba, but my former colleague Robert Sopak was instrumental in setting up a recreational fisheries conservation partnership program, and that program wasn't continued in 2015 with the government change, but the program was a success in finding and using small funding grants for local projects, and a lot of them were highlighted by that the organization could fund part of that project with in-kind donations. So they were very involved in it, and because they were local, they knew more about what needed to be done, such as Mr. Villeneuve here today with his local responses and his needs as well. Do you think that that the federal government could restart that program to establish something similar for organizations being able to be accessing funds for these projects to prevent soil erosion? Would that be a benefit?
Thank you for the question. I can't comment on the past study. I'm not familiar with that. 2015, it does predate my days at the Conservation Authority, but I would say just in general, our conservation authority in partnership with the municipalities, we always try in partnership, whether it's through in-kind services or cash in hand, to reach out and grab as much funding as possible to do any type of these studies, whether it's erosion or flooding. So if there is something available, we're certainly going to be reaching out, and if we're eligible, that's fantastic. To that point, I know locally there's been significant investments, projects related to flooding, which probably local investment totals up to $500,000 in matching funds, specifically just related to flooding. So it's tough to get those matching cash values locally. So the more cash out there from the federal government or other grants, the better, and it helps the municipalities with that.
Organizations, don't have the capacity to apply for these large grants, but because of their proximity to the knowledge locally, in these watershed management services, recreational fishing organizations as an example, agricultural groups, municipalities even, have some of the best ideas and solutions for this soil erosion. And I'm just wondering if you think the federal government can ensure funding is available for these smaller erosion projects that local groups can tap into, if that would be a benefit.
Through you, Chair, and I apologize, I missed the start of that question. There was a slight audio cutoff, but if the question is, could we take advantage of accessing funds and grants, then absolutely, yes, we would love to be able to take advantage to that.
And I'm not suggesting that
Thank you,
this
Mr.
would...
McGuire. Unfortunately, there's no time left. And thank you very much, Mr. Bryant. Next, we have Mr. Chahal. Mr. Chahal, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for all the witnesses for joining us today. I'll start off with Mayor Villeneuve. I think my colleague, Mr. Badaway, had gone down the line of questioning that I was going to start on. But before I do so, I would like to know, I guess, you've spoken a little bit about the properties that are impacted, and have you done in your municipality a full review of the properties in the areas that are impacted and assessments of them, and also public consultations of the areas that are impacted, and what the thoughts of your residents of what they would like done? So I'd like to know what public consultations you've done on this issue.
So firstly, what we did is I personally sent a letter to all residents, so 368 property owners, and we sent them a letter with a series of questions to better understand what they're up against. So do you think that your property is being eroded, was the first question. And like I said, there is already a process in place, and I think that this committee will be working to assess each property. So we have owners looking to assess their property, but then, we need experts to be doing this because we want it to be objective and credible. So yes, we are in the process. It's starting. In 97, the program was abolished. I was mayor up until 2008. And during that time, we knew that there were problems. But right now, people are really seeing the danger that is knocking at their door.
Okay, so you haven't at this point explored assessment firms to do further analysis specifically on some of those properties to understand the possible extent of further erosion or damage that could occur or remediation that may be required?
Like I said before, a photo's worth 1,000 words. When I saw this, I found it really shocking, and this is not the only case. I could have brought you other photos of different properties where work has been done, natural forms of work, but it's gotten to the point where I would not sit on the edge of that property because between the house and the river, I feel it's unsafe. The danger is real. And what troubles me is the situation is severe, and yes, there is work to do, but we need to do it correctly, and for that, people need help. And so we need experts that are going to be able to go and, again, assess this. And this is something that will be done, but things need to be done quickly.
As you were previously an MNA and a mayor previously and now again, I guess what role does the province have specifically in your jurisdiction in intervening and supporting your municipality because I think that's an important part of the relationship, as is the federal relationship. I know where I'm from, the city of Calgary, we had a major flood. We've had extensive work done, but it's been a partnership with 3 levels of government because of jurisdiction. So what role does the province have, and what engagement have you had with the provincial governments?
Il est tout à fait clair que la collaboration.
It's clear that collaboration between the 3 levels of government should be happening, needs to happen. And so I would invite you maybe, and I know that earlier someone wanted to speak to me after this meeting, but I think that maybe we could imagine a partnership, a collaboration between these 3 levels, municipal, provincial, and federal, because right now we're asking who needs to finance this? Who's responsible? Whose fault is it? If together we have seen this economic development thanks to the waterway, and we see that this has caused economic damage to our residents, then I think that we have to do something to help them in order to stabilize the situation, stabilize the shoreline. But yes, I do agree that 3 levels of government should be sitting down and working together very quickly.
Et merci beaucoup encore une fois, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Monsieur Barcelou.
Now, Mr. Barcelou-Duval, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to come back to something I spoke to Mr. Rennie about earlier, whether he has some information about comparative studies on navigation, on areas that are subject to commercial shipping or not. So in my writing, I sent a letter to all residents who live alongside the St. Lawrence, up into Contrecoeur and Saint-Laurent-du-Fleuve, and I asked them if they are experiencing erosion. And what I saw in their answers is that where I got answers was actually in areas where ships were passing through. And there was erosion in certain cases, but what I really noticed was that it was incomparable how many more answers I actually got from them. So what I want to know is, do you have information on this? And when you'll actually be able to get the scientific facts on this?
Thank you for the question, through the chair. I know you're speaking of downstream of Montreal in your case, and we're upstream. Again, it is a site-specific phenomenon. It does make sense to look at all the sources. Certainly, it has been observed downstream of Montreal that the very large drawdown in surge is a significant source. It doesn't surprise me what you're saying, actually, to be honest. Upstream of Montreal, again, the ship wake is enough to mobilize sediments, so it is reasonable to suppose that it does contribute. The question is to what degree.
Thank you. And then secondly, Mr. Rennie, I'd like to know, Mr. Villeneuve spoke to us about people who are afraid to even walk on their property because they know that it's dangerous. And I've experienced dangerous situations like that myself. As an engineer, oftentimes, the waves will dig into the land below us and you can't necessarily see it from above. So what type of protection could allow us to deal with these dangers stemming from commercial shipping, wake? Are trees enough? What does this require in your opinion?
Thank you for the question. I know there's been a lot of research in rivers since the 90s and more recently in coastal engineering to try to incorporate natural solutions. The historic method is basically to put a lot of rock and in very high wave environments actually to put interlocking armor stone that will not move. The intent is that it will move as little as possible. There's a recognition that if it does move, then it's going to fail. And secondly, if it's in some cases, say like a vertical wall, may not have as good habitat. So there is a movement to try to incorporate either more mobile revetments. We have a research project right now on what's called a dynamic revetment of rock that moves to a stable position but still protects the bank, and possibly incorporate vegetation to stabilize the top of the bank. So,
thank you very much, Mr. Rennie. Merci beaucoup, Mr. Barcel-Duval.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barcel-Duval.
The floor is yours. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to try to get at this question of who should be leading these solutions when it comes to mitigating bank erosion. It seems like Mr. Rennie's work on ship wakes, that is going to produce some information that can help mitigate, that part of the issue. But there's still the actual stabilization of the bank, both for natural erosion and ship-caused erosion. And, at a previous meeting, we heard from witnesses who spoke about the historic engineered structures that were put in the 60s and 70s. And I understand that work was funded through a federal program. I'm interested to know if any of our witnesses recall whether that was a federally initiated program or whether it was a municipally initiated program that was funded by the federal government. Perhaps speaking a bit to Mr. Badaway's question earlier about, what can the federal government do to support municipalities? Maybe the question is more, what information do municipalities need to provide the federal government so that they can take responsibility for the riverbank? Mr. Villeneuve, do you have any comments on that? Is this something you want to see the federal government leading on? And have they led in the past?
Je pourrais pas répondre précisément.
I can't necessarily give you a very specific answer in terms of who initiated the program, the older program that was up until 97. I know that many people benefited from this program and the results are positive up until today. But what can the municipality do? Well, I think it's what we're already doing. We are organizing ourselves with the means that we have. We were speaking of drones earlier, about taking pictures, having photos that are taken each year with LiDAR technology to be able to compare year to year. But we need people who know these systems, people that are experts. So we can start with this, but we have to be careful because there are properties that are right on the water. Some municipalities have this problem more than others and have different amounts of money to do this. So we can do something, but we need more support.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Maire. Thank you very much. Next, we have Mr. Lewis. Mr. Lewis, you have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And again, thanks to all the witnesses. I certainly appreciate your testimony this evening. Mr. Chair, so I had mentioned about Essex being somewhat of an island, and I don't retract that statement because we basically are, but there's a lot of islands that surround us, Chair. We've got Pelee Island out in the middle of Lake Erie, very close to Sandusky, Ohio. We've got what we call Boblo Island, used to be a great amusement park. We have Grosse Ile in the United States. We got Crystal Island, Fighting Island, and Belle Isle, and Pesh, and Turkey Island, and the list goes on and on. And so something that hasn't come up in this testimonial yet is Line 5. And because of transport, I think it's important to bring this up and the impact that more freight would bring to the shoreline. So for those that aren't aware of Line 5, of course, it brings our natural resources under the Mackinac Bridge to Sarnia, and quite frankly, delivers really important oil to the rest of Canada, and as well as to the United States. And so my question through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Bryant is, and I don't expect him to be an expert on Line 5, of course, but would it not make sense that both governments, both our Canadian government, the U.S. government, the governor of Michigan, our premier of Ontario, should come to a resolution of Line 5 sooner than later to stop erosion on our river so that indeed it's not barges that are bringing our oil in, that it's indeed Line 5 that is being completely encapsulated in concrete so that there can be no leaks. Does that not make sense? Every time, I would imagine that every single time a freighter goes up and down the Detroit River or through Lake St. Clair, as an example, is another pound of erosion that's going on our seashore. Does that make sense, sir?
Thank you for the question through your chair. Again, I'm not an expert in the shipping components here, but I think it's safe to say that there is certainly an impact when a ship goes through. The extent to which depends on a number of factors, and I think a lot of those factors were discussed by a lot of the different witnesses here today. So there could be an impact, and there likely is an impact, but to what extent? There's various factors that affect that.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant and Mr. Rennie. And I really am intrigued by your study, and I'm going to dive into it more because I would really love to really understand to what extent your study entails, so to speak, sir. Do you work with the likes of the IRCAs, which are the likes of Mr. Bryant? Do you work with the likes of IGRS or IJC on your study? And if you have or you haven't, could you just comment on that, please, sir?
Good. Thank you for the question. Yes, in fact, two conservation authorities are part of the study, and their involvement is basically an interest to understand what the wave energy effect on the shoreline is so that they can come up with proposed methods of shoreline stabilization.
Thank you, Mr. Rennie. And also back through you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Rennie, again, so have you worked with the IJC on this? Have they been a critical partner with this?
Particular study, no, but maybe Dr. Riedel now has a bit more information on his interactions with IJC with respect to the St. Lawrence.
Perhaps Mr. Riedel?
Yes, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the IJC is someone that we partner with quite a bit through a variety of different projects, particularly on water level regulation and with respect to the ecological impacts on water level fluctuations. So there is a tie-in between these water level fluctuations, obviously, and the issue of erosion and potentially the interaction between water levels and commercial ship or waves of among other forcing factors. So this interactions, I think, is some of the subtle and interesting results that hopefully we can tease out.
Thank you, Mr. Riedel. I'm sorry, Mr. Riedel. Good job. I have 20 seconds left. And also the Army Corps of Engineers. Do you work with them as well?
The Army Corps is not directly, but we have had conversations with them.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis. And finally, for today, we have Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to say welcome to our guest. It's very interesting, actually, listening to all the testimony about the issues you're facing. I can appreciate the challenge you have of trying to mitigate the shoreline erosion. So, Mr. Rennie, you mentioned site-specific areas, because I've heard witnesses talk about many, many kilometers of coastline. So, given the entire coastline that we're talking about here, how much coastline are we talking about, and how much of it needs to be mitigated to prevent future erosion?
Thank you for the question, and through the chair. I think I would have to do a little bit more research to answer that question. I know my colleagues at Laval have been looking at the river using GIS analysis and geomorphology and have assessed that to some extent. Dr. Riedel and all, I have also been talking about this question. I think it's many kilometers, but I won't give a number right now.
Just to follow up to that, so you just mentioned a couple of things that are being done in terms of studies. I was wondering about how much technical studies, how many have been done or in great amount of detail to suggest what might be the best solutions. Are you aware of studies other than what's happening at Laval, for example?
Again, thank you. So I know the National Research Council currently has a very big initiative to study nature-based solutions for coastal protection. I don't know if it relates to the fact that this committee was struck, possibly, but I have colleagues, and in fact, I'm involved in some projects related to that, and it's a strong, very strong research initiative in Canada through the NRC and, in fact, throughout the world right now to look at nature-based solutions for shoreline protection.
And given the role that technology plays in our society today in almost every field, every sector, are there technology upgrades that are being reviewed that might help mitigate the impact of the commercial vehicles on the shoreline erosion? Have you talked to anybody with expertise in that field?
Well, I think Mayor Villeneuve already mentioned LiDAR surveys. It's now possible to measure shoreline dimensions at very high resolution through very large domains. That wasn't possible when the Seaway was built. So I think there's a chance for using those technologies to look at bank recession rates. It can actually even be done through green LiDAR to look at bathymetry as well. So I think we can have a better understanding of shoreline erosion given these new technologies.
Well, I'm just assuming that a lot of this work has been talked about for many years, and there's a lot of people with expertise reviewing this work. A question from Mr. Mayor. To your knowledge, what kind of coordination is taking place between different levels of government to address shoreline erosion? And what about between governments and industry? Is there anything happening between these different levels and different players?
À ma connaissance, non.
As far as I'm aware, no. I don't think there's a lot of coordination right now. I think that this commission will allow for better coordination. In terms of industries, I have no contact with them. Maybe with not-for-profit organizations. I know that they've been doing some work. For example, there was one property they did this on, but the results were not ideal. But yes, there's not much coordination, and the proof of that is that we're often asking who does what. So again, do we do this as on 3 levels, working together? But what matters is that this is urgent. Yes, we need collaboration, but we need to act quickly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers. Time is up, good sir, and merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Maire Villeneuve.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor Villeneuve.
One quick comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to do that. I believe this is the last meeting for the study.
It is indeed.
It is. So, and I want to thank Mr. Barcelona-Devel for bringing this forward because it's such an important issue. I think Xavier brought it forward.
Yes.
Yes. Great job. To all the witnesses, and some of which may be still following the proceedings, and to you folks, this is something that we take very seriously. And it was one of the reasons why we brought forward the Canada Water Agency, and with that, the Freshwater Action Plan and the Blue Economy Strategy. And we're working with our Conservative, as well as the Bloc and the NDP across the floor in a bipartisan manner, because it's a very important issue as it relates to all freshwater, all the Great Lakes, et cetera, the St. Lawrence. So I encourage you, Mr. Villeneuve, I sent you some information, I emailed it to you, with respect to the Great Lakes Cities Initiative and some of the reports that we together have provided or have produced and provided other stakeholders. So I encourage you to get involved, and I encourage all of you to send as much information to us as possible so we can move that ball down the field closer to the end zone and hopefully get to a resolve on some of the challenges that you're all facing. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Badaway. And with that, it concludes the line of questioning for today and for this study. On behalf of all members of this committee, I want to thank our witnesses for sharing their expertise and their feedback. With that, this meeting is adjourned.